I grew up around here. Kent was once its own kingdom, an ancient, enchanted land of forests, castles, and battles. As a lover of history, I've always had this strong sense of how the centuries have melted themselves together into the landscape we see today. Fields always have their secrets, like this one in Chainhurst just outside Marden. There's nothing really remarkable about it, except perhaps for the secret it holds in its soil. Proof of the part it once played in one of the most astonishing periods in English history.
This is OP Mike 2. Diver.
Aren't you ever scared, Noel?
Scared? Oh, yes. I'm scared that nothing I'm going to do for the rest of my life will ever match up to this.
Bombs away. There goes the cookies. Lucky. There go the ascendances. There goes my bottom.
By 1943, the Second World War is into its 4th year. Like communities all over Britain, the village of Marden in Kent has long settled into a war-weary routine. Life on the home front boasts few luxuries: tinned food, 1 egg per person per week, 1 a fortnight in winter if you're lucky, condensed milk, processed cheese, bacon rationed to 1 ounce, and Lord Beaverbrook wants all your metal.
My saucepans have all been surrendered. The teapot has gone from the hob. The colander's leaving the cabbage for a very much different job. So now when I hear on the wireless of hurricanes showing their mettle, I see a vision before me, a Dornier chased by my kettle.
Granddad's in the Observer Corps, Granny does the Spitfire Fund. Daughters work in forestry, farming, munitions, or the lucky ones deliver Spitfires. Kids barter bullets and bits of bombers or whatever else they find buried in the bushes and hedgerows. The war has provided unforeseen opportunities, broadened outlooks. The war has changed everyone.
This is the BBC Home Service. Here is the news, and this is Alvar Liddell reading it.
1943 is the turning point of the war. The Third Reich finds itself under attack on multiple fronts. The Allies, victorious in North Africa, have now landed in Italy and are fighting their way up the peninsula against determined German resistance.
The Allies are now winning the Battle of the Atlantic. The U-boats, formerly the scourge of life-saving supply ships, have now become the hunted. And day and night, RAF Bomber Command and the American 8th Air Force are bombing Germany. By late 1943, Stalin's Red Army has broken Hitler's divisions at Stalingrad and Kursk, and the push to drive the shattered German army back into the fatherland has begun.
Adolf Hitler needs a plan to reverse Germany's sliding fortunes. And fast.
4 years before, in 1939, Hitler publicly boasts that the Reich is developing secret weapons with which Germany herself could not be attacked. Winston Churchill takes the threat seriously and instructs MI6 to investigate.
But the months pass and no threat emerges. Hitler and his secret weapons become a laughingstock around Britain. At this time, the Allies have no credible evidence of any Nazi covert weapons programs, which doesn't mean there aren't any. After the Dunkirk evacuation, the successful outcome of the Battle of France means that the Germans are now just 22 miles across the English Channel from Britain's Kent coast. Hitler orders the first of a series of long-range gun batteries to be installed at Ordingen, south of Cap Gris-Nez, and the shelling of Dover and Folkestone commences. This section of Kent's coastline soon earns the unwelcome nickname of Hellfire Corner. Hitler likes artillery. Older German soldiers remember the propaganda value of the notorious Paris gun in the First War, which bombarded the French capital from a distance of 75 miles. Hitler orders further German batteries to be installed around Calais, including the arrival of 7 Krupp K5 railway guns and one even more powerful K12 cannon with a range of 71 miles. Winston Churchill is never one to duck a challenge. He orders 2 14-inch guns from surplus battleship stock and has bomb-proof bunkers built for them on the high ground behind St. Margaret's, Dover. These 2 guns, named Winnie and Pooh, begin pounding their counterparts across the Channel. In a game of one-upmanship, Churchill orders 4 further batteries to be installed in the Dover area to join in the shelling of the German positions. These large-caliber cross-channel duels will continue for most of the war, to the misery of the civilians who refuse to leave their homes and flee Hellfire Corner. But none of these can reach London from the continent. And what Hitler desires is a weapon capable of raining down shells on England's capital from Nazi soil. Lots of shells.
Take cover!
Firing is quite simple. Just the pull of a trigger and... That whistle means, look out, Jerry.
Many of them were just boys. Same with the Germans. You can find these little monuments to our lads in the fields and the lanes. We don't forget them, nor what they did.
By mid-September 1940, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, has failed to achieve the required air superiority for the invasion of England to take place. The Battle of Britain is an unexpected, irksome first defeat for the Nazis, and retribution against the victors is not long in coming.
Britain now finds herself alone against the might of the Nazi Empire, and for 56 out of the 57 days following September the 7th, 1940, London is systematically bombed. The aim is not only to isolate the British and to break their morale, it's to render them utterly incapable of continuing the war.
Los!
November the 14th, 1940, the Luftwaffe attacks Coventry. The 10-hour raid comprises multiple waves. The city is bombed so intensively with a mix of high explosive and incendiaries that a firestorm is created. Over 4,000 homes are destroyed and 2/3 of the city's buildings are damaged. Around 600 people are killed and 900 seriously injured. Many of the city's inhabitants, having suffered previous raids, have now made arrangements to leave the city in the evening and sleep overnight in the surrounding towns and villages.
The damage done to Coventry shocks the nation and raises the stakes. German bombers are actually going back to their bases in northern France to reload with bombs before returning to the city. The devastation done is of an order of magnitude greater than ever previously seen, prompting Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels to coin the term Coventry to describe the utter annihilation of an enemy target.
"1941 becomes the darkest year for wartime Britain. All alone now in Europe, facing down the most powerful empire on earth. The war is not going well. Despondency hangs like a rook in the eaves. It's getting hard to keep your spirits up. Only RAF Bomber Command exists to take the fight back over to Germany. Enemy aircraft drone overhead nightly on their way in to bomb London."
In Marden village, any illusion of countryside safety is dispelled late in the evening of February the 4th. This is the Maidstone Road today. And this is what it looked like the following morning in 1941, when the village awoke.
2 bombs released by a German aircraft caught in a searchlight strike the road right outside number 3, Mrs. Hode's confectionery stall. 4 civilians and 1 visiting soldier are killed.
What do you think about us going over to Berlin and doing the same to them?
I should think so too. A bit worse than this, I hope, with a wicked bugger like he is.
Bomb them tenfold. I'm sorry for the women and children of Berlin, but what about the women and children of this country?
Well, if I was a man, I'd go over there and I'd give them the same as what they've gave us here.
But the idea that Britain is carrying out any sort of effective attacks on Germany turns out to be a fantasy. Though brave airmen of RAF Bomber Command do carry out night bombing raids on German targets, the disturbing conclusions of a report come as a shock to the War Cabinet.
On the 17th of May, 1940, 12 Blenheims were sent to a place called Jean Blou. How many aircraft of those 12 do you think we lost? A lot. All 12.
Of those bombers recorded as attacking their targets, only 1 in 3 drops bombs within 5 miles. If the number of bombers actually dispatched on a raid is factored in, then the number of bombs dropped within 5 miles of a target has been quoted as low as just 5%.
Handley-Page Hamden squadrons, Whitley squadrons, and Blenheim squadrons in 1940 were almost decimated.
Professor Archibald Hill, Member of Parliament for the University of Cambridge.
The Air Ministry has been too optimistic. We know most of the bombs we drop hit nothing of importance.
So, what is the remedy? What's it going to take to get Britain back in the war, hitting the enemy hard where it hurts? Churchill's friend and scientific advisor, Professor Frederick Lindemann, personifies a new school of thought in the realm of aerial bombing. Simply put, you may not be able to hit an enemy factory from 18,000 feet, but you can hit the city.
Lindemann submits a detailed report advocating a complete overhaul of RAF Bomber Command. There must also be new aircraft, new navigational aids to find the target, greatly improved bomb sights to hit the target, new tactics, and new leadership. Churchill's War Cabinet is considering Lindemann's report when on the morning of December the 7th, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy attacks the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Angry at neutral America's increasing cooperation with Britain, declares war on the United States also. It's a move that has puzzled historians for decades, a momentous decision taken almost without consultation among his senior staff. Britain's fortunes suddenly look up. The Americans are finally in the war on Britain's side. On the air war front, Churchill and the War Cabinet approve Lindemann's new plans, and in February 1942, Air Marshal Arthur Harris is appointed Commander-in-Chief of RAF Bomber Command. The language of war changes overnight.
The Nazis entered this war under the rather childish delusion that they were going to bomb everybody else and nobody was going to bomb them. At Rotterdam, London, Warsaw, and 100 other places, they put that rather naive theory into operation. They sowed the wind, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind.
Arthur Harris inherits a volunteer force that is ill-equipped, poorly armed, dejected, and reeling from the heavy losses. So one of the first steps Harris takes is to organise Operation Millennium, Britain's first 1,000 bomber raid against an unsuspecting enemy. The crews perk up immediately at the thought of some serious payback. Alongside the Halifax, Wellingtons and Stirlings, this will be the first major use of the new 4-engined Lancaster heavy bomber, loaded with incendiaries, and the new 4,000-pound high-capacity blockbuster bomb, or Cookie. Here comes the whirlwind. Target for tonight, Cologne.
20. Steady. Steady. 25. Bombs away. 30. There goes the cookie. Lucky. And there go the assemblies. There goes my bottle.
Cologne is devastated. The city is so wreathed in smoke, Bomber Command cannot obtain photographs for a week. Churchill writes to Harris, quote, "This proof of the growing power of the British bomber force is also the herald of what Germany will receive city by city from now on." The raid stuns Hitler. Humiliated that his people are now on the business end of a blitz of their own, incensed that the Luftwaffe has no heavy bombers with which to retaliate, Hitler has cause to consider other means by which he might strike back at the enemy.
At that time, officers of the German High Command are ordering their subordinates to round up existing projects to bring before Hitler. 1. Codenamed FZG-76, a pilotless jet-propelled flying bomb with a 1-ton warhead currently under development by the Luftwaffe. 2. Codenamed A4, a guided ballistic missile with a 1-ton warhead in development by the German Army Weapons Department since 1937. 3. Codenamed HDP, a large caliber, multi-charged, long-range battery of supercannons. 4. Following the expected success of the A4 ballistic missile, a far larger rocket will be built, with a range exceeding 3,000 miles, capable of hitting the eastern cities of the United States of America.
After the shock of Pearl Harbor, America wastes little time kicking her war machine into high gear. The US 8th Air Force is established in Britain as 8th Bomber Command, and combat groups begin arriving months later in the summer of 1942. The build-up continues for the rest of the year. Tens of thousands of American airmen and army personnel pack the new airfields and military camps springing up across the country. The British population doesn't quite know what to make of the new arrivals.
We're lost. Can you tell us the way to Hawthorne Cross, please?
We can't get through that way. You'll have to go back the way you came.
Thank you, miss. Go back. Knock it off, you guys, will you? We're meant to be guests here.
All these Americans, Canadians, Aussies and Kiwis mean more mouths to feed in blockade Britain. On the home front, back in Marden, Kent, my grandfather, Captain James Day, is hard at work in his role as area representative of the Kent War Agricultural Executive Committee. The job he has in this war is very different from the one he had in the previous one, a night bomber pilot who flew 50 missions which included attacking Zeppelins, for which he received the Military Cross and the French Croix de Guerre with Palm. These days, when Captain Day pays a visit to your village, he wants to plough up those cricket and football pitches you've been disguising. And don't forget your village green and the railway embankment for the use of corn, potatoes and sundry vegetables cultivated to perfection for a half-starved nation. And here's James's brother Alfred, escorting one hungry visitor around the Marden Fruit Show. By December 1942, MI6 intelligence analysts are receiving reports from agents in Germany
which mentioned secret weapons being tested at a Baltic fishing village named Peenemünde. Hard evidence is smuggled out by Polish agents who recover pieces of an A4 rocket and get them to Britain via Sweden. MI6's conclusion? There's clearly something fishy going on up near the Polish border. What finally does it for government scientist Dr. R.V. Jones is a taped conversation between two German generals currently being held prisoners of war at Latimer Park, Buckinghamshire. In a discussion on the turn the war has taken, Lieutenant General Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma voices surprise that the rocket attack on London has not yet commenced. Other reports from a Danish chemical engineer, agents of Polish intelligence, and the Austrian resistance group Cassia corroborate the Peenemünde project. Based on received information, there's confusion as to whether the threat is in fact a ballistic rocket, a flying bomb, or both.
It's dangerous work, but photographs secured by the Royal Air Force give invaluable information to the High Command. Thousands of British and French lives will be saved by the accurate reconnaissance of the RAF.
Churchill appoints his son-in-law Duncan Sands, MP, to head up the investigation and report on countermeasures. The results of photo reconnaissance missions are disappointing until a June flight months later reveals startling photographs of what appear to be horizontal rockets on low loaders beside a launch gantry. But no sign of any flying bombs. Duncan Sands proposes that the Peenemünde facility be utterly obliterated at Bomber Command's earliest convenience. Not all those present are in agreement.
They asked me if I would take responsibility for finding out whether such a weapon existed, and if so, to advise what action should be taken to deal with it.
There, on that particular picture, I saw what seemed to me to be the outline of a rocket, somewhere around 38, 39 feet long, tail fins perhaps 10 feet long, and perhaps 10 feet across at the rear end there. And immediately I saw this, I took it across to Lord Cherwell to show him that this seemed to be a rocket.
But Lord Cherwell, aka Professor Lindemann, believes it's a hoax. Some sort of ruse to compromise valuable Allied intelligence resources.
I advised the War Cabinet that, in my opinion, the Germans were developing a long-range rocket. But that opinion was not readily accepted. In particular, Churchill's principal scientific advisor, Professor Lindemann, argued strongly that any such rocket would have to be propelled by cordite, and that cordite would have to be burnt in a thick steel case, which would mean that the rocket would weigh somewhere between 60 and 100 tons, and that wasn't a feasible proposition.
Well, the complication, of course, was that Lord Cherwell didn't like Duncan Sands, and once Duncan Sands had begun to believe the evidence and say that it was a very serious danger, Cherwell reacted the other way and started to argue that there was no such thing as a rocket.
Not being a scientist myself, I refused to be drawn into a scientific argument. I took the very simple view that the fact that perhaps Professor Lindemann didn't know how to make a long-range rocket didn't necessarily mean that the Germans didn't know how to do so.
While Churchill's War Cabinet wrangles over the significance of Peenemünde, Bomber Harris is pulling together the first major joint operation with the Americans. The mission is named Operation Gomorrah, after the biblical city that received God's judgment of fire from the sky. Target for tonight, Hamburg. The campaign starts on July the 24th and lasts 8 days and 7 nights. The American Air Force bombs by day and RAF Bomber Command by night.
Flank directly beneath us. Right. And searchlights underneath us too. Watch your height. I'm watching everything.
It's been a hot week and Hamburg is bone dry. The use of 4,000-pound high-explosive cookies early in the raid, followed by a mix of incendiaries and further high-explosive, triggers a firestorm. The flaming tornado, up to 1,000 feet high and with winds of 150 miles per hour, reaches temperatures of 800 degrees centigrade and incinerates more than 8 square miles of the city.
When we came out of the shelter, the dead were lying all around, all burnt. They had caught fire and some had jumped into the lake. Horses jumped in as well, but they were still burning when they came out.
Hamburg reaps the whirlwind. During the 8 days and 7 nights of Gomorrah, an estimated 35,000 people are killed and 125,000 injured. Such is the devastation that the city will never recover to full war production. After the war, former Nazi armaments minister Albert Speer writes that the German High Command became thoroughly alarmed, recognizing that further raids of a similar scale and intensity would force Germany out of the war. Precisely what Bomber Harris had envisioned. Hitler learns the worst and roars for Vergeltung, retribution. The only thing that will have any effect, he cries, is a systematic attack on their villages and towns. You can only smash terror with counter-terror. The Führer is given word that 70 flying bombs have been test launched from the secret facility, with a 42% success rate. An infuriating problem of the bomb veering off target has now been corrected after test pilot Hannah Reich piloted several of the bombs in a makeshift cockpit and identified the cause. Grimly elated, Hitler designates the FZG-76 Vergeltungswaffe 1, Retribution or Vengeance Weapon 1, V1. It's given maximum manufacturing priority, and Flak Regiment 155W will be responsible for launching the V1 offensive against London. Command is assigned to Oberst Max Wachtel, an artillery veteran of the First War and experienced flak commander in World War II. Wachtel's job will be to train his men in the storage, preparation and launching of the V1, and to handle logistics relating to site defense, security, transport, and resupply of the bombs from their manufacturing bases. While all that's going on, British weather forecasters clear the evening of August the 17th for Operation Hydra. It's a full moon, visibility should be good. Hydra is so secret, not even the bomber crews at the briefings are advised of the true nature of the target. They are told instead that if the attack fails, it will be repeated the next night, and on ensuing nights regardless, within practical limits, of casualties. A diversionary raid has been planned using Mosquito fighter bombers, dropping thin strips of aluminium foil known as window. This will show up on German radar screens, giving the impression of a huge raid destined for Berlin. The hope is that the lethal Luftwaffe night fighters will take the bait to intercept the fake mission, leaving the true target undefended. 596 heavy bombers duly depart England on the mission. Target for tonight, Peenemünde.
We might get out. Yeah. My God. You light your fag on any of those. Ow! That's a bit close. I think we've been hit personally. Yeah, there's a bit of fight. Yeah. Hello, Skipper. Hello? We've been holding the FRANZ here. Okay. The oil's leaking out of the FRANZ turret, so there's nothing to worry about. Okay. Okay, boy. My God, I've never seen anything like this before. Neither have I.
70% of the Peenemünde complex is destroyed in 3 bombing waves. A strong wind causes the second wave's Pathfinder target markers to drift eastwards, so some aircraft bomb the sea and the coastal labour camp.
The whole attack was of the order of 2 miles overshot, and unfortunately in that very position was the hutted camp in which all the conscripted men from the occupied countries were, including our Luxembourgers and others who warned us about Peenemünde, and of course they suffered very heavily indeed, and we never had another report out of Peenemünde from them. It was an absolute tragedy that I mean, no one's to blame. It's one of those tragedies of war that happened, but one should recognise the great contribution those Luxembourgers made.
Arthur Harris will later learn that 500 to 600 labourers in the Trassenheide camp were killed. Luck also runs out for Bomber Command. By the time the third wave attacks, the night sky is swarming with German fighters, furious at having been duped by the Berlin diversionary raid. 28 bombers are shot down in 15 minutes, including some by fighters employing the new Schräger Musik system, upward-firing machine guns unleashed into the bomber's fuel tanks from its blind spot below. Whilst wreaking havoc, Operation Hydra has failed in its chief objective, namely to kill as many of the technical personnel as possible. Renowned rocket engineer Werner von Braun has survived, along with the programme's director, Major General Walter Dornberger. Only 2 leading scientists have been killed, along with 130 of their staff. Experts on both sides generally agree that the Hydra raid delayed the V2 programme by only 2 months. The effect of the raid is to force the Germans to disperse production of the V2 to other locations out of reach of Allied bombers, including a test site at Blizna in Poland for test firing. Peenemünde is left with a deliberately blitzed appearance by the Nazis to give Allied photo reconnaissance flights the impression that the complex has been abandoned due to the raid. Back in London, MI6 is unconvinced.
We took down all the evidence we had of Peenemünde and the rockets, the V2, as it was then called. And there was very little evidence, in fact, on the V weapons from any other source. Now, it happened that the day before, we just got some photographs of the Pas-de-Calais area in France, which didn't correspond with anything we'd ever seen before. The sites were rather notable for the fact they had 3 ski-shaped buildings. In fact, they became known as ski sites. We found that each had a ramp under construction which was pointing towards London, and a small hangar which was also pointing towards London, where obviously whatever the weapon was assembled. Now, when you've got a ramp, you can't have a rocket, because a rocket has to be fired straight into the air. Anything that goes up a ramp obviously has to have wings, so that it has lift at the end of the ramp. So we concluded that we were faced by another weapon with a wingspan of less than 20 feet, because that was the size of the door of this little square hangar. And we then went to our aircraft section, headed by Babs, and said, we're now looking for something with a wingspan of this dimension.
While British intelligence gets to work tracking down the weapon that will use the ramps, the Germans move V1 and V2 manufacturing and assembly to a new underground facility built near Nordhausen in the Harz Mountains. The man chosen to head up the construction program is Obergruppenführer Dr. Hans Kammler, the SS's highly skilled engineer and construction chief. Kammler is the man who ordered the construction of the huge Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp in September 1941. He oversaw the installation of its more efficient cremation facilities. Kammler now orders the construction of the Mittelbau-Dora camp beside the Nordhausen facility to house the slave labourers, who up to now have been working and sleeping in the tunnels.
We couldn't even drink when we were caught drinking, except 1 cup of water a day. We used to be beaten. For 6 months, we never saw daylight. There was not even bunks where we could sleep, so we had to sleep on the floor wherever we could.
By the end of 1943, when the complex is finished and V2 production commences, Armaments Minister Albert Speer and his staff visit the facility in December and observe the terrible conditions, corpses littered everywhere. Some members of Speer's staff are so shocked they have to take an extra period of leave. While Speer implements changes to improving working conditions and productivity after his visit, by war's end 20,000 labourers will have died from the cold, exhaustion and disease. At the same time, Hitler gives Albert Speer the go-ahead to commence construction of the HDP supercannon complex at a place called Mimoyek, south of Calais. Excavations deep into the limestone hill begin in October 1943, again using slave labour. Oberstleutnant Georg Bortscheller is appointed commander of 1,000 hand-picked troops of Artillerieabteilung 705, whose job it will be to protect and operate the Nazi supergun. The weapon is designated Vergeltungswaffe 3, Retributional Vengeance Weapon number 3, V3. The complex will comprise 2 totally bomb-proof bunkers 1 kilometre apart, buried hundreds of feet into the rock, each housing 5 banks of 5 cannons, totalling 50 cannons, all aimed at London.
Throughout the summer of 1943, RAF and US aerial reconnaissance squadrons are busy photographing northern France in exceptional detail. This is not only to gather intelligence for Operation Overlord, the planned invasion of northern France, but also to detect building works which might signify preparations for Hitler's V-weapons offensive.
And that's when you found
oh, there's a new road there, or there's a new building there. What's that? So you get out the old cover and look that up. No building. So what are they putting up there? It just worked from checking over and over again.
In April, Constance Babington Smith's Central Interpretation Unit picks up unusual building activity at several key locations in the Pas-de-Calais. One of these, in the Epaulettes Forest outside Watton, comprises a huge concrete blockhouse taking shape among the trees. The Allied chiefs have no clue as to their purpose, nor does Professor Lindemann. But the usually sceptical professor is catching on fast.
If it's worth the enemy's while to go all the trouble of building them, it would seem worth ours to destroy them.
The Americans bomb Watton without knowing exactly what they have bombed. Unknown at the time is that the V2 rocket storage and launch site in the forest is one of several currently under construction. The Watton raid is so devastating the Germans are forced to abandon the site for rocket operations. Instead, they later salvage a relatively undamaged part of the complex for the production of liquid oxygen to fuel the coming V2 onslaught.
Weeks later, more suspicious building activity is detected by the Central Interpretation Unit in photographs taken across the English Channel in a wood outside Yves-Roche. This time, a long, low building raises suspicions. It's 250 feet long, 10 wide, with a curved end, for all the world like a hockey stick or a ski slope. Then, CIU's eagle-eyed Constance Babington Smith makes a further discovery. She compares photographs of Peenemünde taken months after the Hydra raid with previous shots, and she spots this. A tiny cruciform shape perfectly positioned on what looks like a ramp, banked up with earth, aimed out to sea.
Measuring it with my measuring magnifier, I could tell that the span was just 20 feet. In other words, this was the evidence we had been waiting for. Here was the midget aircraft on a ramp, a launching ramp.
The V1 ski sites are small targets, often concealed in woods, purposely located close to farms and villages to blend into the countryside. On Christmas Eve 1943, 672 American fortresses attacked 24 sites, dropping 1,716 tons of high explosive. But the bombing is wildly inaccurate at significant cost to the local population.
In the months leading up to D-Day, Allied tensions are at an all-time high. The immediate destruction of anything that could challenge the success of the invasion is prioritised, even above the strategic bombing of targets in Germany. Inevitably, there is extensive, tragic, collateral damage to French communities in the vicinity of these Operation Crossbow targets.
One Frenchman would later reflect, "We knew it had to be done, and that it had to be done to us."
Naturally, the devastation from the bombing was enormous. In the mornings, the British attacked, and in the afternoons, the Americans, and in the evenings, both the Americans and the British together. The result was that nothing remained of those sites other than a desert, which was impossible to deal with.
The Allies still have no idea of the purpose of the Mimoyek site. Little credible evidence has been forthcoming, and the Allies fear the unknown. Biological or chemical weapons, even atomic bombs, could be fired or dropped onto British cities. So Mimoyek is repeatedly bombed over the next 4 months, but little damage is caused since the complex is located deep inside the limestone hill, leaving just the bomb-proof reinforced steel blast doors on the surface, protecting the cannon barrels. Then rumours begin surfacing from Allied agents that the Germans are building some sort of long-range artillery capable of firing tube-launched rockets at London. The problem isn't bombing the site. It's verifying whether the complex has been permanently put out of action. It's not like you can phone up Georg Bortscheller and schedule an appointment for a ground inspection. The Allied chiefs know they have a problem. They recognise with alarm that it's only going to be when the invasion forces eventually fight their way eastwards and overrun the bunker that Mimoyek's secrets will finally be revealed. But at that time, what if it's too late? What if the weapon already became operational? And how do you destroy a fortified complex guarded by 1,000 crack troops buried hundreds of feet down in limestone rock inside a hill in enemy territory? One scientist sharpens his pencil and gets to work on the problem. In August 1943, Hitler places the V2 project directly under SS control, replacing Walter Dornberger with Hans Kammler as director. At the same time, the fixed V2 rocket launch sites at Wizerns and Sotavast are heavily bombed and put out of action. Unknown to the Allies, however, is that the deadly but efficient Kammler has a plan B, the use of Meilerwagen mobile trailers to launch the rockets.
Hans Kammler knows that when the time comes, what the Germans may lose in custom-built launch sites and convenient storage, they will more than make up for with the flexibility to fuel up and fire the rockets from anywhere. In a village street, a farmyard, a city square, or on a lane through a forest.
The same goes for the V1, with their ski site storage buildings, launch ramps and depots blown to scrap. Colonel Max Wattel and Flak Regiment 155W switched to simpler, rapid assembly sites that take just a few days to organise. Modular ramp, a concrete road to access the site, and just the essential buildings and flak batteries. And so it is in the lead up to D-Day, with all the Allied deceptions in play to conceal the invasion's true date and location. The RAF and the US 8th Air Force find themselves engaged in what amounts to a game of whack-a-mole with Max Wattel and his flak regiment. As fast as the Allies bomb these new mobile V1 launch sites, more just spring up elsewhere. It's suddenly all gone very quiet on the rocket front. Churchill gives the order for military and civilian authorities to be briefed for the first time on the V1. The information on the V2 rocket and V3 supergun will be strictly compartmentalized to avoid public panic.
It's no secret we've been frustrating the Nazi V-weapons program. We believed the Germans had little hope of making these weapons operational. Regrettably, we now have proof they're deploying at least 2 types for immediate use. Their chief objective, however, won't be our invasion forces. It's the complete destruction of London. This is the V1, codenamed Diver. It's a pilotless flying bomb propelled by an Argos pulse jet. Jerry has developed these mobile ski sites to launch divers from anywhere across northern France. When the engine stops, the bomb comes down and people die. The V1 delivers a 1-ton warhead of Amatol 39 over an operational range of 160 miles. Jerry intends launching hundreds of divers at London per day. Cruising speed is in excess of 350 miles per hour. So the only aircraft that'll catch these things are the Typhoons and Tempests, Mosquitoes, Spitfire 14s, and boosted P-51s. So, we have some aces up our sleeve, and more than a few in the seats I see in front of me.
This is the V2, codenamed Big Ben. It's a liquid-fueled ballistic rocket launched from a combined trailer and service gantry. Another 1-ton Armatol warhead. After its brief flight into the stratosphere, the V2 falls back to Earth. The impact velocity is an estimated 3,000 miles per hour, almost 4 times the speed of sound. Unlike the Diver, its victims won't hear it coming. There are no known countermeasures. In summary, gentlemen, we expect the Germans could deploy one or both of these weapons within days. Hitler has high confidence London and other cities can be bombed into submission or force the Allies into a negotiated peace. Next slide, would you? The good news? These weapons have limited range, which means the Germans have an operational window that starts to close as our invasion forces move east.
You're all familiar with the Germans' Diver and Big Ben vengeance weapons, the V1 and V2. Well, you won't know about this one. You're looking at what we believe is the V3 prototype photographed by a fellow agent in Leipzig. It's a multi-charged long-range supergun, barrel length 130 meters. The Germans call it the high-pressure pump, the centipede, the busy Lizzie. We call it the London cannon. Once the shell is fired, secondary charges ignite into the barrel along these points. The idea is to accelerate the round to 1 mile per second to provide a significant increase in range. We believe the Germans are building a V3 battery inside a concrete reinforced hillside here at Mimoyek. It comprises not 1 but 50 of these cannons made up of 10 groups of 5, all aimed at London. The Germans would like to hit the capital from northern France with over 1,000 shells per hour, 24 hours a day, pounding the capital into submission. London won't take another blitz. We're going to stop that from happening.